We're live. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to Senate Education. It's Tuesday, March 23rd at 1:34 p.m. Senators, just to give a quick overview of what today and the week ahead looks like, we have two amendments that we're going to consider, one related to S-100, the Universal School Meals Bill. We do not have possession of that bill anymore, but I have spoken with the chair of Senate Ag, who also serves on appropriations. He is willing to co-sponsor it. Anyone else who is interested in sponsoring it, please feel free to do so. And Jim, we'll have a conversation in a minute about that, how best to proceed. S13 is, even though we don't have possession of it, it is our bill. And senators may recall from Friday, we did have a request from the independent school community to play a role in those discussions as it relates to weighting. We then are now starting the next part of our work this session, where we have taken in two House bills. Today, we're going to be hearing from Representative James on for an introduction, and then Jim DeMarais will take us through a pilot program that has passed the House. And then tomorrow, we're going to look a little bit at a bill related to public school facilities in the state. And that will be paired up with an update from Dan Riley on school ventilation and air quality. Thursday, we are going to return to a subject that we started back a while ago, and that is civic education. And we are hearing from a number of individuals, including some local teachers and students on that issue. And the agency, as you may recall, will be coming back to us with a report, if you will, as it relates to what's happening right now in our schools and what they believe might need to happen going forward as we talk about educating for democracy. And then, is there any role for Senate education in this work? So that is just an overview. As you may recall, I have asked senators to be thinking about priorities that they want to accomplish in this second half. And we can talk a little bit more about those toward the end of the meeting. But with that, Mr. DeMarais, we could kick it off with you and take a look at S-100 amendment. This is, just so you know, Jim, going to be co-sponsored by Senator Starr. And this is relating to the universal school breakfast and lunch for all public school students. It also has the incentives for schools to buy locally from farms. I think Democrats who are just in caucus and others, I think the question around all this is funding, and this will continue to be the question. How do we fund this? How do we do and possibly implement a bill that is, I think many of us would agree, if possible, would make a big difference in the lives of students, but also an economic development bill from my perspective as it relates to small farms and agriculture. So Jim, if you wouldn't mind, I guess my first question is, since we don't have jurisdiction, the committee will not need to take a vote. This would be a floor vote. We could bring it to appropriations, but I believe appropriations has no longer has it. So the question is, where do we bring it? Do we bring it to ag, or do we just bring it to the floor?
So this is your individual amendment.
This is my individual amendment that will go, Senator Starr and I will be the co-sponsor.
Okay. Yeah, so I think your option is a floor amendment on this one. Yeah.
Okay. Do you want to just take the committee through it one more time, just as a reminder? Committee members will remember that these are recommendations that came from the Agency of Education. Their request, Senate Agriculture has looked at this. They spent some time this morning. I don't know if you were there, Jim, but no. I was given the thumbs up that they're in agreement with making these changes, and having Senator Starr and my name, as well as anybody else interested, hopefully will give the nod to colleagues that we're all in agreement, and hopefully the bill can be amended as read. So with that, Mr. DeMarais, please.
Okay, sure. Oh, Jane, can you let me share the screen? Great, thank you. S100. Okay. Okay. So for the record, Jim Dameroy, Let's Console. We're looking at draft 1.1, Senator Campion's and to be SAR's amendment to S100. It replaces section 4. So already in the language coming out of Agriculture was this section 4. So there have been some changes to it, but the language is already in the bill passed out of Agriculture.
Jim, we're
I'll
losing
point
you a
out the
little.
changes in this amendment as we.
A little
sorry,
closer.
I'll point out the changes in this amendment as we go. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So this, remember, the purpose of this is to devise a way for the secretary to collect information on low-income households for the purpose of providing federal benefits, not just for free and reduced price lunches, but for a variety of programs like SNAP and things like that. So with the universal school meals, there won't be a need to fill out the forms that are in use now for free and reduced price lunches because universal school meals are universal. So this is the way in which the secretary is empowered to get equivalent information. So what it says is the secretary shall first define what student poverty means for the purposes of determining qualification for federal funds by local education agencies, which are SUs, school districts and schools, and for the purpose of determining student eligibility for various educational programs and benefits where economic need is a consideration, and collecting and reporting disaggregated and student level performance data as required. And then the secretary shall establish what student poverty data should be by agencies, which are supervisory unions, school districts, and schools, the means by which the data should be collected, and the frequency of the collection. And the secretary shall determine how this data will be reported to the Agency of Education by those groups, and the frequency of reporting. And then lastly, it says that SUs, school districts, and schools shall collect data required and report this data to the agency as required. So that's what it says. The differences from the underlying bill is simply, for example, in A here on line 9, determining qualification for federal funds by, it used to say, I believe, school districts, but now it's been extended out to SUs, school districts, and schools. So you'll see that construction throughout this. So it's been expanded to include those other two entities. And then B and C are new as well from the underlying bill, determining student eligibility and collecting and reporting disaggregated data. So those are the changes from what's in the underlying bill. The rest of it's pretty much the same.
Great.
Let me take this off.
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Questions or concerns? This is, again, the language recommended by the agency. Senator Hooker, please.
So this goes to the issue that we've talked about being able to draw down as many federal funds as possible. Is that?
Yes.
Doing okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't really address the concerns that some of the school districts have had about funding, coming.
No, it doesn't.
From the general fund. Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Other questions, concerns? Okay, how about just a straw poll of support, just in case this, I don't suspect any concerns on the floor, but maybe the way to ask it, does anyone against this language? Okay, seeing none, terrific. So Mr. Demeray, again, if you would just loop back to Senator Starr, feel free to do it electronically and copy me, and we can put our names on it. I believe they also did a straw poll this morning, and we'll be ready to go on the floor. Thank you.
Yep.
Shifting to S13, Senators, this is the waiting implementation plan, which is on the floor tomorrow. As senators may recall, on Friday, the independent school folks wanted to be consulted and would like that in statute. I think generally we agreed with that. Jim, is there anything you want to say? I don't even remember. I think this is new language to actually be in front of us. So would you mind just pulling this up as well?
Yeah, it's very simple. It is here. Okay, so again, for the record, Jim Demeray, Let's Council, walking through draft 1.1 of Senator Campion's proposed amendment to S13. So already in the S13, there's a requirement for the task force to collaborate with the Ds. All we're doing here is we're adding in the Vermont Independent Schools Association. So we're just adding that one other advocate into this list.
Great. Since we are amending our work on this, I would entertain a motion to do so.
So moved.
So moved by Senator Perchlik.
This would be a floor amendment too.
A floor amendment, correct. So we'll do it on the floor, but I do believe, correct me if I'm wrong, Jim, we would want a committee vote on this.
You want at least a straw vote.
Yeah, thank you. So Senator Perchlik has moved the amendment. Discussion. Seeing none, all in favor, if you would raise your hands. All opposed? So it carries 6-0-0. And I will plan to do this on the floor. Great. Thanks, everybody. Okay, moving on. We are now shifting to look at a House bill. I believe we have Representative James. Welcome to Senate Ed. In with us, and Mr. Demeray. I've asked Representative James to give us that 30,000 foot overview of the bill, the genesis, a little bit about what the bill does, and then we will pick up with Mr. Demeray. So with that, Representative James.
Senator Campion, and thanks everyone for having me. I am going to start with a very brief story since Senator Campion asked me about the genesis of the bill. In the summer of 2019, prior to the pandemic, I traveled out to Denver to attend a national education policy conference. And as you do at conferences, I had the chance to, choose workshops that I wanted to attend. And so I spent an afternoon in a workshop on community schools. And being new to the legislature and, new to the education committee, I was really fascinated to learn about this model and to hear about all the really interesting and innovative community schools that were at work across the country. But the workshop focused on community schools that were in place in cities. And so when I returned to Vermont, I reached out to the Education Commission of the states and asked them if they could provide me with examples of early or innovative or current community schools in rural areas. And to my surprise, one of the examples they sent back was the Molly Stark School in Bennington, which is about 25 miles from where I live. So I went down to visit that fall and was very impressed with Molly Stark, which got its start as a true community school in the mid-1990s and achieved some really incredible results under the leadership of a pioneering principal there, Sue McGuire. And over the years, the Molly Stark model has changed and evolved, but it's nonetheless inspirational. And so I introduced a bill pre-pandemic that would start up some funding here in Vermont to get some community school pilot or demonstration grant programs going in our state. And so H106, I'm going to just give you the highlights from my admittedly very lengthy floor presentation from last week. So what I can tell you is that H106 would establish a 3-year demonstration grant program that uses federal stimulus funds. And with this money, I believe that probably 10, possibly up to 12 eligible school districts or supervisory unions would be able to design and implement a community schools model. Community schools are an evidence-based approach that is gaining momentum across the country. And community schools are not just a traditional school in a community or neighborhood. They have a very specific and research-driven definition, and in that definition lies the key to their success. There have been a number of studies conducted on community schools around the country, and these studies prove that community schools can improve attendance, they can improve academic performance, high school graduation rates, students' attitudes towards school. They can help close the achievement or opportunity gap for low-income students, special education students, BIPOC students, and English language learners. Students are more likely to progress from grade to grade and accumulate more credits. Discipline referrals drop, while a positive perception of the school among teachers, staff, and parents rise. The reason that I think the bill is really important now is that community schools tackle head-on the challenges that are intertwined with poverty. So this bill targets schools with a significant percentage of low-income students, and it helps them and their families to overcome the out-of-school barriers that hold them back and keep them from succeeding in school. So as our communities and our families are recovering from the pandemic, I feel like it's, we in the House Education Committee and now the House feel like it is time not just to recover, but to reinvent. So skipping ahead, community schools are, they're not a new model, but it's one that's gaining traction right now around the country. There are about 5,000 community schools across the country, and I've been able to identify maybe a dozen that are implementing all, most, or significant aspects of the model here in Vermont. The 4 pillars of the community school model are, sorry, I'm skipping around. 1, integrated student supports, and this means meaningful partnerships with social and health service agencies that bring resources right into the building or help families easily access these services to break down out-of-school barriers to learning. So Pillar 1, integrated student supports, could include, for example, physical and mental health care, nutrition support, housing assistance, or other wraparound services. Pillar number 2 is expanded learning time and opportunities. And learning is the top priority here. So we're talking about programs that include academic after-school, weekend, or summer programs that emphasize real-world learning and community connections. Pillar 3 is family and community engagement. So we're talking here about programs that bring parents and other community members into the school as partners, true partners, with shared decision-making and meaningful opportunities to connect with their own child's education, but also their own support. So the school becomes a hub where families are provided with services that they say they want and need. So we're talking about things like GED classes, financial literacy classes, nutrition, computer skills, substance misuse education, and more. And then the 4th pillar is collaborative leadership. And what's key here is the hiring of a community school coordinator who works with teams of people across the school, administrators, teachers, parents, community members, and community partners to put together an integrated and comprehensive approach. So those are the 4 pillars. What this bill does is provide, as I mentioned, 10 districts or SUs that basically win this grant with $110,000 per year to either hire or designate a community schools coordinator and roll out the model in their school over 3 years. It requires reporting every year from the eligible schools. It requires the AOE to report at year 1 and year 3. And again, the point here is to wind up, hopefully at the end of this program, with 10 really valuable, viable models from districts or SUs around the state that can provide other districts with the information they need to move forward with this promising model. So I think I'll wrap up there. Eligibility is determined by free and reduced lunch. 40% is the threshold. Or as you'll see when Jim walks you through the bill, we have some other ways that AOE can identify eligible schools as well.
Thank you, Representative James. Committee, questions? Senator Lyons.
Thank you. That was terrific. It sounds like a good bill. But you talked about the benefit to schools with high ELL needs. And so I'm thinking about, and as well, poverty, of course, driving some of this. And then also a BIPOC community. So as you were thinking about this and thinking about having sort of the demonstration grants, and because I haven't read the bill yet, does the bill specifically target schools that have perhaps a higher proportion of BIPOC students or a higher proportion of ELL students and so on?
Thanks, Senator Lyons. That's a great question, and it's an area of the bill where I think the Senate could probably do some work.
Cool.
So I'll explain that in a minute. I'm looking through for the specific eligibility criteria. The eligibility criteria in order to apply that we have built into the bill right now are 40% free or reduced lunch. And that's kind of an interesting threshold because that includes, almost half the schools in Vermont. So a lot of districts and SUs are going to be eligible through only that criteria. Then it includes schools that are targeted through the federal ESSA Act for comprehensive support or equity support, which is a definition I don't have handy right now, but there's that kind of vector too. So that throws out a pretty broad net. And as we were bringing this bill to the floor, we actually had an amendment that would delve a little bit deeper into how AOE would select and target eligible applicants, like how they would pick the winners, essentially, that we weren't able to bring because we had a little parliamentary glitch. It was an amendment from Rep. Rogers. And so I was in speaking to Senator Campion last night. I told him that we had an amendment specifically around this that we weren't able to bring. And so I think that's an area where the bill could really use some strengthening and some more work. We also had some practitioners, and this is really, this is so interesting to me. This topic, I think, is just fascinating because the Learning Policy Institute, which is the leading sort of think tank that does a lot of work around community schools, they lay out 4 pillars that define a community school model. And those are the 4 pillars I have in my bill. The NEA has 6 pillars, one of which is equity. And I was trying to bring forward a streamlined bill that was really based in every research study I could find. And so when I originally brought this bill, it was model legislation that came through the LPI. They have 4 pillars, but we took some testimony about additional pillars that revolve around equity. And that might be another area that you would want to take a look at.
Great. Senator Perchlik.
Thank you. Great to see you, Representative James, in our committee. Yeah, this seems like a good bill. I had the same kind of question as Senator Lyons about how you reach out, not just the BIOPOC or other groups that the schools represent, but some schools that just aren't very good at applying for grants. So maybe some wording about how AOE reaches out to them. I did a school grant program once in my state job, and we found out that just all the schools that always get the money are the ones that even applied. So we had to find a way. How do you get to those people that don't even think about applying for grants, because they're the ones that kind of need it most some of the times. But with the second pillar you talked about, I think you called it out of school learning, but and mentioned after school. I wonder, because I'm on the after school task force and writing, we're finishing an after school report, and there's a bunch of work that the state and this committee has done is on summer programs and out of school learning. I just wondered if the committee heard from the after school folks and how this would overlap with the two programs that we have specific to after school already in the state.
Good question.
Yeah, thanks, Senator Perchel. I reached out to Holly Morehouse.
Yeah.
Great. Of the After School Network, and she is very interested in the bill, and I won't speak to whether she's excited about it. I think she is, but we weren't able to get her in for testimony. And I also know that that task force report is due mid-April. So, once again, progress, not perfection. We couldn't get her in. We were running out of time with crossover. But I think we were well aware that integrating whatever we try to do here with the report from the after school task force is going to be a great idea.
Great.
And I wanted to respond to something else you said that has escaped me now. So if it comes to me, I will circle back around.
Getting schools to apply that don't apply.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. So I think that's the reason. I when I was skipping around my way too long floor notes, I missed this point, and I kind of want to underscore it. Research shows that hiring a community schools coordinator is the key to making this program succeed. So I just hope as you start to consider the bill that point won't get lost, and I can bombard you with studies showing that. So I think that it's going to be really important for the AOE to make sure that districts who have low capacity, who are feeling overwhelmed by COVID, who are thinking, oh my God, another program, really take a hard look at this, because the funding would specifically bring that capacity to their schools in the form of a community school coordinator. So, this is not some unfunded mandate that falls on the back of an overworked principal or a social studies teacher who somebody says, here, can you do this in your spare time? This specifically brings to the school the person to do this work, and that's a research-driven approach.
So related to that a little bit, would you tell us if your school A in whatever district and you qualify and you get the $110,000, tell us what would happen in that school over 3 years.
So the first thing that would happen in the school is that you'd hire a community schools coordinator.
Right.
Who could be someone with, that's not a licensed educator. That could be a grant writer. Could be somebody with deep ties to the community or deep ties to, regional social service agencies.
Yep.
Second thing that person should do is work across the school and across the community to do a needs and assets map. So you want to reach out and survey parents. And I really hope you have Principal McGuire in, and she can talk to you about this. But the very first thing you should do is take a look at your school's needs, take a look at your family's needs, and take a look at all the assets that your community has to bear, and then develop a plan that brings those together. So if if you find that one of your key barriers to learning is food insecurity, how are you going to solve that?
Well, we just passed a universal school lunch program. That'll solve that.
For example.
Right.
Okay, so bad example. But so the first thing you're going to do is make a plan based on your community's needs and strengths and assets. and then you start rolling it out. And we did hear testimony that these take time to take root.
So, for example, I'm thinking to Molly Stark, which is in my district, if they had a dental office really down there. I mean, and I don't know if it's still there, but at one point when Sue McGuire was in charge of this, in working on them becoming what they became, students could go for dental services, students could go, I suspect, for mental health, all sorts of things. So that $110,000 that we would be giving a school largely would cover this person that, again, would facilitate all of this. It's not as though you would be getting these services in the school always. You might be bringing them in, but that person would be coordinating. Is that safe to say? Like, okay, we're going to have a dentist come in on Friday because this is a big need for us. We're going to have somebody else come in. We're going to make sure that students have dinner, because we have identified that as a need. That is how you see it.
That's exactly how I see it. And
Great.
Molly Stark would be an example of a school. I mean, I don't want to, hint around here, but Molly Stark has 100% free and reduced lunch.
Yeah.
And they have a very strong foundation in place to, build back better.
Yeah. One of the things, and I mentioned this to you when we spoke about it, that this committee has heard a lot about is trauma throughout the state. Students that have experienced trauma, students that where in different parts of the state, the mental health services aren't there. And so this would also, you're saying, this coordinator could come in and identify that as a need in some schools and make certain that, the dollars aren't there to hire a mental health professional, but that person would be making that connection, identifying it, and then reaching out to perhaps services locally, bringing somebody in. And if those services don't exist, they would, again, work with the school board, school district, et cetera, to sort of make sure that this is kind of front and center as a funding need, maybe.
That's correct. And the key is, I think, creativity. The key is innovation. The key is unique.
Yeah.
So these are not cookie cutter programs. And we also took testimony on sustained funding. And community schools can tap into or bring down several sources of federal title funding. A lot of community school coordinators spend a lot of time developing kind of a braided or blended funding stream. So, they'll work with Molly Stark being a great example. When Principal McGuire was there, she partnered with Sunrise Family Resource Center.
Mm-hmm.
They applied for and won a $300,000 community development block grant, and they built a wing onto the school to house social services. It was remarkable.
Yeah.
So you start looking for other sources of funding from everyone from the business community, in-kind donors, philanthropic or nonprofit partners, grants you can apply for, and these federal sources of funding as well. So that's something that the community school coordinator should be focusing on.
Great. Very helpful. Good. Final questions for Representative James before we move to Mr. Desmarais. All right. Thank you, Kathleen. Thank you, Representative James. Mr. Desmarais, the floor is yours if you wouldn't mind taking us through the bill. I believe it's on our website already. Yep. So unless senators need to see it front and center, please have a look at our website. And Mr. Desmarais, the floor is yours. And you're muted, Jim, just so you know.
Senator Campion, do you mind if I stay to watch the walkthrough?
Nope, not at all.
Thanks.
Okay, let me find it. Here it is. Okay, so for the record, Jim Desmarais, Ledge Counsel, we're walking through what is draft 9.1 of H106, but it's also the pass version from the House. The official copy hasn't come out yet, but this is the same language. Sure. So this bill, Section 1 is a title, so it's called the Community Schools Act. Section 2 are the findings and purpose. And there are a number of findings here. I won't read them all. But but it's talking about basically the benefit of having a community-based school approach, and talking about, for example, line 17, according to AOE, an average of 38% of students across all SUs during the 1920 school year qualified for free or reduced price lunch. So it's talking about the challenges that some students face. Talks about in 3, what community schools facilitate, which is the coordination of comprehensive programs and services, which are selected to meet the unique needs of students and families. And then talking about research on the 4 pillars of the community school approach, which we'll get into. But the 4 pillars are integrated school student supports, expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities, active family and community engagement, and collaborative leadership and practices. And then it shows that that these interventions, improvements, improve outcomes. And it's talking about the evidence-based approaches to this sort of support. And then it's talking about return on investment. So every dollar invested returns $7 in net benefits to the school. And talking about every dollar invested in programs to support can yield up to $15 in return. So some economics there. And then talking about that the establishing community schools is one of the 10 recommended strategies for restarting and rethinking the role of public education in the wake of COVID-19. Then talking about the fact that these schools have been established in many states, particularly in the cities, but the approach also has been successful in rural communities, and gives an example of that. And then goes on to the purpose. So purpose is to support a demonstration grant program for the implementation of community school programs that provide students with equitable access to a high quality education. Section 3 is the grant program itself. So we have some definitions. First definition is of the community school coordinator, who is really key to this whole bill. And that means a person who is a full-time or part-time staff member serving in an eligible school or in a school district or SU with an eligible school and appointed in accordance with Vermont law, and is responsible for the identification, implementation, and coordination of a community school program subject to the operational and reporting structure of the community school coordinator's employer.
Jim, may I pause there for just a minute?
Sure, yep.
Just a quick question, Mr. Murray. So are people required to hire somebody?
No.
No.
This is a grant program. So
Okay.
if they choose,
They may go through this without hiring a coordinator.
Sorry. If they are taking grant money, if they choose to take grant money,
Yep.
then they either have to hire a coordinator,
Yes.
or they have to, there might be a district that already is working toward this goal,
Mhm.
but it's not quite organized enough. So that if they're doing that, then they can elevate somebody to that position to help implement the program.
Thank you.
The definition of community school program goes into those 4 pillars we talked about. So it means a program offered at a public elementary or secondary school that includes all of the following, which are 4 things. First is integrated student supports, which address out-of-school barriers to learning through partnerships with social and health service agencies and providers, coordinated by a community school coordinator, which may include access to services such as medical, dental, vision care, and mental health services, or access to counselors to assist with housing, transportation, nutrition, immigration, or criminal justice issues. Second, expanded and enriched learning time and opportunities, which may include before school, after school, weekend, and summer programs that provide additional academic instruction, individualized academic support, enrichment activities, and learning opportunities that emphasize real-world learning and community problem solving that may include art, music, drama, creative writing, hands-on experience with engineering or science, tutoring and homework help, and recreational programs that enhance and are consistent with the school's curriculum. Third pillar is active family and community engagement, which brings students, families, and the community into the school as partners in children's education. It makes the school a community hub, providing adults with a facility to access educational opportunities they want, which may include coordinating services with outside providers to offer English as a second language, classes, green card or citizenship preparation, computer skills, art, financial literacy, career counseling, job skills training, services for substance abuse, misuse, and other programs that bring community members into the building for meeting or events. And collaborative leadership and practices is the fourth pillar, which bring a culture of professional learning, collective trust, and shared responsibility using strategies that shall, at minimum, leverage the multi-tier system of supports and include a community school coordinator and a representative of families in the community, and may include school district, and other leadership or governance teams, teacher-learning communities, and other staff to manage multiple complex joint work of school and community organizations. So apologies for reading all that, but that is a really key part of this bill, these four pillars. So next, demonstration grant means a grant provided to an eligible applicant. Eligible applicant means a school district with an eligible school or SU with an eligible school. And definition of eligible school means a public elementary or secondary school that has a student body where at least 40% of students are eligible for free or reduced price lunch, or has been identified for comprehensive or equity support and intervention. So then we go into the authorization of the grant, subsection B. It says the secretary is authorized to provide annual demonstration grants of up to $110,000 a year for a period of 3 years for each eligible applicant. And that can be used for two things. First, to hire a community school coordinator to develop and implement a community school program, or designate a community school coordinator from existing personnel and augment work already being performed to develop and implement a community school program. C goes into the administration. So it'll be administered by the Secretary of Education, who shall develop the demonstration grant application, determine the grant amounts, and provide grant funding on or before December 1st of 2021, 22, and 23. Gives the ability of the Secretary to deny or reduce second and third year grant funding if the applicant has made insufficient progress toward developing the program. And then requires the agency to inform SUs of the availability of these grants and provide technical assistance in applying for these grants. And then to advise applicants of other sources of funding that may be available. The use of the funding in D, one is to, as we talked about, to hire a community school coordinator or to designate a community school coordinator from existing personnel to augment work already being performed. And if the funding is used to hire a community school coordinator, then during the first year of the grant funding, that coordinator would conduct a needs and assets assessment of the school to determine what is necessary to develop a community school program and action plan. And during the second and third years would work toward overseeing the implementation of that plan. And then at the end of each year of grant funding, the applicant who received grant funding we undergo an evaluation designed by the Agency of Education. And then in December of 2022 and 24, the agency report back to you and the governor on the impact of this program. And that would be made publicly available. Appropriations are $1.529 million to the AOE. And this is from the Esser Funds, Esser 3 funds. And that's for the grant funding. And then for all 3 years, the grant funding. So one appropriation covers all 3 years. And then from that, the agency can set aside 1% for informational assistance and technical assistance, and 2% for evaluations. And the effective date is on passage.
Committee, questions? Senator Lyons and then Senator Perchlik, please.
Just going to the funding piece. Once these are dollars that are coming to us as a result of the pandemic alone, or are these ongoing? Yeah. So after how many years will these funds disappear? Is it the 2023?
3 years.
So it's 3 years. And then suppose, and maybe this is a question that we would hear from testimony and possibly Representative James. Was there a discussion about what happens when and if some foundational program is in place and requires additional funding? Then does that revert to the traditional funding process for schools? I mean, does it become part of the property tax process?
Yeah. So first I have to correct what I said. The bill says this, but it's wrong. Sorry, I apologize for this. The appropriation I said was 1.529 million, which is what the language says in the version I'm showing you. But I believe that was amended by appropriations. And so the as-passed version has a different number in it. And that number, Rep. James, is 3.5, I think.
Representative James, you want to weigh in on this?
Thanks, Senator Campion. As amended by Approps, it is 3.399 million of Esser money.
Okay.
Thank you. Sorry about that. Yeah, that's the only change appropriations had, I believe, on this bill.
Okay.
Which we don't have the final version yet from the House, so that's why we're showing you this other version, which is too bad. But in answer to your question, Senator Lyons, if schools want to continue with this after the 3 years, then the cost of that would be built into local budgets, unless you do something further at the state level.
Okay, but basically the funding would be to set up whatever structures or plans, curriculum, measurement would be needed to keep the community school going.
Correct. I mean, the community school coordinator position at the school is funded from this grant for 3 years, but that position would be funded from school budgets going forward after that.
All right.
So in some ways, I mean, I know that Approps is still thinking about taking some federal funds for universal school meals if they were to do it for 3 years, and then it again is picked up or it disappears. I think Senator Perchlik, please.
Thank you, Chair. My question is really for AOE, and I was going to maybe
Sure.
asking Representative James, but maybe it makes sense just to wait that when AOE comes in, I can ask them.
Senator Hooker.
Thank you. And the bill suggests that the coordinator sort of do the survey and then implement the plan in the second and third year. where does the money for implementation come from? And I know, Representative James, you talked about partnering with different groups and stuff, and I'm curious to know what you found out about how successful, obviously some of these schools have been around for a long time. They must be successful in forging those partnerships. But do you have any information about the percentage of these schools that succeed and don't have to just give up the plan after the initial investment?
Representative James?
Thanks, Senator Hooker. And I have a barking dog, so I apologize. One thing I wanted to point out about the funding is that this is presented very specifically as a 3-year demonstration grant program with the federal funding ending in 3 years. So ultimately, at the end, our product will be 10 examples from around the state in different settings with lessons learned. So at that point, if the schools that have participated want to continue the program, they would have had 3 years knowing that the grant program ends to try to build a sustainable funding model. So that's one thought about the funding. I have a significant amount of information from other states about all the different ways in which community schools models get started and how they sustain themselves. But I guess the best blanket answer to that question is to say that they are often started with seed money and they build from there depending on the partnerships that can be put in place and whatever costs the local school budget can or can't bear. So
it would be helpful if you could forward along to Jeannie Lowell at some point if you have numbers that show, in I'd say as much as regional as you can, but we'll look at nationwide numbers. These schools started this after a 3-year period. This percentage continued. That would be really helpful to us.
Great. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to get stats on this is how many people started it and X percent of them succeeded or failed, because it's more organic than that.
Okay.
What I can provide is significant data sets on how community schools do. I have quite a bit of information on, for example, the ROI studies that I included in the findings. I only included, 2 of them. And I can send along information on funding.
Yeah, I would just say, if you can take a look, because again, we don't want to start something that, evidence shows in 3 years, nobody's going to continue this.
Right.
I know that we're going to get some data, but, I think that would be really important information for us to have to move confidently, knowing that, half of them would continue or 7/10 would continue, and that this would really make a difference. And if the evidence showed otherwise, we would want to know that to make sure that we can do this in a way that would make sure that they could continue, to be supportive, to be helpful, see what we might need to put in. Senator Hooker.
I just want to say that these are things that I think every school should have. So it's like, how can we set these schools up and put them in place to succeed and then spread out the lessons learned from them to other schools. But, it always comes down to a question of funding, and that's where we're at.
Other questions? Okay, well, we will be continuing on this conversation later this week. And tomorrow we will be hearing from other House members regarding the school construction bill, and they too have a literacy bill that they will be bringing in at some point. Let's take, before we jump into some school funding things, let's take a 10-minute break and we'll come back. Okay, good afternoon. Welcome back to Senate Education. We are transitioning now to looking at where things stand with Esser Funds. Dollars coming in from the federal government that this committee and appropriations will have some say over. I've also asked Brad James from the Agency of Education to come in on Friday, and Jeannie's working on this, to let us know what each school district is going to be receiving, so that senators know in their districts, have a sense of what the districts in their district will be looking at. And this might be and we'll have to talk to Ledge Council, but it was raised by Senator Lyons. Can we give some direction around these funds? Can we say, for example, as districts are receiving dollars, some are probably being directed in federal statute to go towards certain things, and but there might be other ways for us to direct and use some of these funds. So with that, Ms. Parker and Mr. Perrault, thanks for coming in. Thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. For the record, this is Brianna Parker from the Joint Fiscal Office. And today we are going to be sharing with you about the federal dollars coming into the state. We've actually prepared some materials for you that will look into the allocation amounts at the district level. So looking at some of those portions that are going to all of the different schools. I did provide some.
Ms. Parker, just for clarification, so that sounds like we may not need then Mr. James in if you're going to provide that to us right now. Is that accurate?
If I could just jump in here, Brianna, the information you're providing is at the SU level, right? Rather than down to the district level. So they may want more detail.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. I will also say that this data that I'm going to be presenting with you today, we did get the Esser 1 and Esser 2, as well as the CRF and title dollars, all from the Agency of Education. But the Esser 3, the most recent federal dollars that just passed on March 11th, those are still estimates at this time. So perhaps also getting some more information from Brad James as that becomes available would definitely help to clarify this. But I think it's still very valuable at this time to get a sense of where we're at. So with that, I think we can go ahead and dive in. I did provide some materials that Jeannie, I believe, has posted, but I'm also happy to share my screen if that would be easy.
Why don't you share your screen?
Great.
Thank you.
All right. So here we have a look at the Esser Funds. And so, like I said, this is looking at the allocations that are going to the supervisory unions. So to put this into some context, this is about 90% of the total funding for Esser. The remaining 10%.
Ms. Parker, would you mind making that a little bit?
Oops. Is that better?
Can you do one more? It looks like you might be able to do the 50-year-old level so that I can see it. There we go. There we go. Perfect. Thank you.
Great. Yes. So this is the 90% of the funding that is going to the supervisory unions. And there's another 10% that is going to the state allocation. So for things like the bill we just heard being discussed, H106, for example, would be using funding out of that other 10% that's at the discretion of the state. So as we can see here, the amounts for the different packages, the stimulus packages that came out, starting with Esser 1, it was the smallest, coming in at a statewide total of about $28 million. Esser 2 got a little bit bigger at about $114 million. And then this Esser 3, which I'll reiterate again, is an estimate at this time, came in at a whopping $224 million. So definitely the most significant of the packages to date. And each of these have a few different parameters in regards to the dates that these are available. And so for the first Esser 1, they will be available through September 30th of 2022, whereas both Esser 2 and Esser 3 have slightly longer timelines, reaching all the way out to September 30th of 2023. So an additional year on the latter two of those funds. Most of these are, in terms of how we can use these funds, these are all going to be at the school's discretion. And some of the allowable uses that is provided in the language of this bill is the funding can be used for anything from preparing schools for reopening, providing COVID-19 testing, upgrading projects, including improving air quality, and then, of course, addressing learning loss. And, you know, ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and ESSER 3 are all generally pretty flexible in the use of their funds. ESSER 3 has a few more kind of stipulations, including 20% of the funds must be reserved for learning loss. So there's a few more kind of benchmarks there that need to be addressed. We also see that kind of similar requirements. There's more of them for ESSER 3 on the state side as well. And so I think the way I'll transition into the next document I want to provide is just by saying,
hold on there,
Ms.
Go ahead. Any questions as it relates to this document? And I
have a question.
Yes, please, Senator Perslick.
On the uses, and I don't know if Ms. Parker has all this information, but we heard on their discussion about S100 that all those schools can use their ESSER money to provide the lunches, free breakfast and lunches. Is that a direct use, or would they kind of have to, use some other money for the lunches and then use the ESSER for that? That's more connected to like learning loss or something. Is that a clear question?
That is a great question to ask. I would like to defer that to either Mark or Jim if you guys have any information more specifically. I think that's actually falls into kind of a legal question to determine whether or not, that would be an allowable use. ESSER does provide pretty significant flexibility. However, that's a great question to ask and something that we need to be really clear on going into using this funding.
So I'm hearing my name next to a great question to ask, and I'm distracted by working on something else. So can you please repeat the question?
Can the ESSER money be used to pay for the expanded free lunches that is called for in S100?
Oh,
and Mark is also here. I see he's unmuted. I don't know if you have an answer to that, Mark.
Well, I was just going to jump in. I think as a threshold question, it has to be related to COVID-19. Is that right, Jim?
It does. It does. It's interesting because COVID money has been used, obviously, for universal meals during the crisis. But I'm less sure about it being used going forward for that purpose. I have to get back to you as the answer. My understanding, though, from H100 is that the flood of ESSER 3 money coming into school districts, I think the thought behind that is that there will be enough money there for school districts to use to provide universal school meals without having to increase their budget for the next year or two. So in the short term, I think Esser funds will be used for that purpose, or for not directed for that purpose, but there'll be enough money around for that purpose. But let me get back to you with a more concrete answer.
Thank you for that. And I'll also be keeping a list of outstanding questions. Other questions for Ms. Parker on this document at this point? Ms. Parker, so if you would just be so kind as to, just to make sure everybody's on board, take us through each one of these lines each one of these columns that we're looking at. I think that would be helpful. So for example, the Addison Central School Union, they are receiving 28 million roughly, that's accurate, in these or they did in ESSER 1. They'll receive 114 in ESSER 2 and then 224 in ESSER 3? No, that's for everybody.
Yes.
One line down, Senator.
So, so there is the, so they'll be receiving 403,000, a little over $1 million, and then 3 million. So the combined is right there. Help me then understand why there are differences. You know, what is this based on? This is based on poverty, etc.
That's a great question. So the way that the funding is distributed is by using the Title I allocation. So that same formula that goes into Title I is going to determine what you receive for the Esser 1, Esser 2, and Esser 3. And so just to remind everybody, Title I is another federal program that is a way to ensure high quality education for every child by providing extra help to students who need it the most. So for example, a low-income family, they can, it's based on the percentage of those students in a supervisory union or school. And so using that same formula for the Title I funding, it will then be used for the Esser 1, 2, and 3 distribution.
Okay.
So-
Go ahead, Senator Lyons, please.
Yeah, so it kind of sounds paradoxical, doesn't it, to require use of the funds for catching up with COVID-related issues, but at the same time, basing the funding on what's been going on prior to the pandemic. You may have a very affluent district that has significant problems. Could be some stress-related problems with kids, but that isn't being considered in the appropriation or the allocation of funding. So curious.
If I could jump in, the allocation of the money is determined by the feds. So the state has no choice.
Yeah, I know, I understand that, but the feds just took the usual route, the way we usually get our Title I or whatever, but then said, now you get it, now you have to use it to recover from COVID, where there may be a huge differential between what you need and what you might get. It's just thinking. Sorry.
Any other questions for Ms. Parker on this? And Mr. Pearl, this might be a question for you or Mr. Demeray. As everyone may recall, in H 315, we did put in money to help school districts manage these dollars. I guess I'm just looking to confirm that this is the kind of thing that they would these dollars would be used basically to help them figure out and to stay within the guidelines that are being put forward.
Yeah, there's a provision in the bill that would appropriate some money to hire a consultant that would be available to provide technical assistance to the districts. The idea would be that this is an awful lot of money to be, pouring into school districts at one time, and the idea was that they might better use the money if they had some additional assistance in deciding how to go about allocating it. One of the considerations there that's come up that I'll just jump in on is I want to remind everybody that this is basically one-time money, this federal money coming in. So to the extent that you're using it to fund programs like ongoing universal meals, you create sort of a cliff at the end of the 2 or 3 year period when the federal money runs out. So.
Yeah. No, it's a good point, and also as it relates to some of what Representative James was talking about. Okay, other questions? I guess for me, the thing that's, weighing on me, so if you're a district like Addison Central, you're getting a little over 5 million. It's COVID related. You have 3 years to spend it. And so those investments would look largely like things related to learning loss, certainly, programs that are going to help support students. And then maybe there are things, and this is, I guess, why the business managers are getting the support they're getting. I could see people wanting to stretch, what that definition is a little bit in some regards. I mean, it's, or not stretch, but make certain, again, that they are tied accurately to what the feds want us to use. Okay. Anything else? Okay. Please continue, Ms. Parker.
Great. Thank you, Senator Campion. So this next one, I apologize in advance. It might make us all squint a little bit. I will try to walk you through it. It will perhaps provide a little bit more context just in the ways in which this funding is allocated, and so we can get a little bit of perspective on some of the recurring sources of federal funds that go out to schools, and then also additionally what this COVID relief, what that looks like. So really this is just trying to give us the big picture look. So I will try not to overwhelm everybody with all of the numbers on the screen and walk you through what we're looking at here. So starting on the left-hand side, we have each of the supervisory unions, as well as moving to the right, all of the different sources of title funding. And so these are the funding sources that the federal government provides to educational institutions on a recurring basis. These are things that will happen regardless of the pandemic. And so this is kind of the base federal funding that these supervisor unions will receive. So Title I, we've already talked about to some degree. It's the kind of base level funding. It's the same one that we're using to calculate the different ratios for the Esser funding. Title II is to provide low-income and minority students with greater access to effective teachers, principals, and other school leadership. And then Title IV is working to improve the use of technology and other kind of student support systems. And so all three of those roll up into the next column here to show us kind of the sum of all of the recurring federal sources in this light green color. Maybe I'll pause there and see if there are any questions or comments before we dive into more of the COVID funding.
Oh, these are, so again, this is what we would be getting even if we were not in a pandemic from Title I, II, IV.
Right. And this is also ongoing money. So this is money that school districts can expect to receive every year, although the amounts change from year to year. Yeah. It's an ongoing source of revenue.
Thank you.
So moving on, we have the CRF, which stands for the Coronavirus Relief Fund. And so this was part of the original CARES package, that first stimulus bill that came out back at the beginning of the pandemic. And so the CRF was set to expire on December 31st of 2020. But on the 27th, some legislation passed to extend that deadline further by about a year. However, most of the money was used up early on because of that initial deadline. And so what we're seeing here, most of that money has already been spent. Another kind of point I want to bring up about the CRF is that this was not a formula-driven allocation. Instead, it was a program that you could request funding for a specific use and then receive the funding if that was approved. And so it has a little bit of a different structure than the Esser funding does, which was a formula-driven approach. So that's a distinction between those two. Then the next three columns are the Esser funding, which we talked about in depth on the previous page. So just wanted to add that into kind of this big picture view of things. And then moving along to the next two columns, those are just the sum of, the first one is the sum of all of the COVID relief from Esser 1, 2, 3, and the CRF. The next column is just the Esser funding. And then this last one is going to be the sum of all of the federal funding from the different title sources, the Esser sources, and the CRF. So as we can see, this number is very significant, all the way up to $478 million. So it's a very significant amount of money that's going to the state of Vermont schools. So that's kind of this at a high level. So I'll pause there and see if there are any questions or additional comments.
Can you share how the use of the federal dollars has been tracked for each district?
I believe that would be a better question for the Agency of Education. So
Yes,
I think I'll hold off on commenting on that for now.
Okay.
Thank you.
thank you.
So just to clarify, I think it's a great question. You're wondering, what sort of report back districts have, just to confirm everybody crosses every T, dots every I. Okay. That's a great
Well,
question.
it certainly has implications for future spending.
Yeah.
And, there's I guess there's the 10% that is the flexibility piece that we might be able to direct, but it would be interesting to know what the districts have seen as important and how they've utilized that funding.
Just maybe
Yes.
to add that
Please.
there are significant reporting requirements for the use of all this money. It's subject to federal audit and clawback if it isn't used properly. So I think this is something that the Agency of Education will be able to answer for you.
Thank you. Great question. Okay. Ms. Parker.
Wonderful. All right, I have one more document to show all of you, and this is one that just kind of displays the data in a little bit of a different way. It's looking at how much this funding kind of comes out to for each of the supervisory unions on an equalized pupil basis. So just to kind of remind everyone, the equalized pupil is kind of the way that the state of Vermont uses education spending. So this is a weighted amount for each of the pupils. And so we wanted to display this in a way that would kind of put it into context so people could think about how much of an impact this is really having on students. So that's what this table is really trying to get at here. So to walk everyone through what we're looking at, starting on the left-hand side, once again, we have the supervisory unions, and then moving on to the equalized pupil count per SU, and then adding in the poverty ratio for context, and also then looking at the title funding, the Esser and CRF, so all of that COVID money, and then finally looking at the total there. And so this, like I said, is just trying to kind of put it into context. So for reference, the last couple years, we've been looking at an equalized pupil spending of about $17,000. And so that can kind of just give us a benchmark for thinking about how much money is really going to an average student in the state of Vermont.
Very helpful. Any questions, Ms. Parker? Okay, if you want to just pull the screen down, and that would be great. Great. Thank you very much. Mr. Prolt, do you want to add to this conversation?
No, I don't think I have anything to add. I just nailed it.
Okay. Yep. Didn't know if you were working together or separately, so that's great. Well done, Ms. Parker. So, again, it just begs the question, what are the things that we have some jurisdiction over, and what do we not have, some control over? And that, I think, is something we're going to be working with our friends in appropriations on. Just to give an example, I know that the University of Vermont has forwarded a proposal to us. And so this is outside of the scope of this conversation, but I suspect dollars are also coming in, and maybe we should get a sense of this from both of you, either now or later, what are the dollars that the legislature is going to have some say over with regard to higher education? I think the UVM proposal, and I believe they're coming in next week, is a proposal for them to do a number of different things. Puts on, I don't know the real details off the top of my head, but where would those kinds of dollars be coming from? Because I think we still would have, I suspect, as dollars are coming in, some will be directed to higher ed and others wouldn't be. So can one of you tell us a little bit about that?
I can just jump in a little bit. I don't think we've tracked the higher ed stuff, but we've been mostly following K through 12. But as Brianna pointed out, there's a chunk of the money that's coming in that's reserved for the Agency of Education to hang on to.
Yeah,
That's the pot of money that, for example, the contract and technical assistance will be paid for. So I think that you guys do have some role to play in determining how that money goes out. And we can probably get you the total. I don't have the totals in front of me. Do you, Brianna? On the SEA
I do actually. Yeah, let me pull those up right now. So for the state agency for Esser 1, it's $3.1 million. And of that, 1.5 million has already been spent. And then for Esser 2, it is $12.7 million, and 3.5 million of that has already been spent. And then for Esser 3, it is $28.5 million. None of that has been spent at the current time. And I will say also that Esser 3 does have some more stipulations in regards to how it's spent. It's really more just a way to be mindful. There's still a lot of flexibility, but 5% must go to learning loss, 1% must go to the summer programs, another 1% must go to after school programming, and then another 0.5% goes to administrative costs. So those are just kind of some buckets or frameworks to put into the context of that, but there's still quite a lot of flexibility if you know how to spend it and allocate it right, So
that's very, very helpful. And we did get these numbers also from, or that specificity, that direction a little bit from the Agency of Education when Secretary French came in, but it's a good and important review because as we keep talking and reading and hearing from constituents, I just want us to be focused on, again, where our role lies in all of this. And it sounds like there's some real possibilities for us to do some work with AOE and our friends in appropriations. One confirmation question I guess I'm looking for an answer on is, we can't endow anything with these dollars. Is that accurate? We can't say we're going to do the fund for fifth grade initiatives and endow it with 10 million forever. I mean, that isn't considered spent money. Is that accurate?
Maybe a question for Jeremiah.
That's a really good question.
Mr. Desmarais, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. That goes to the question of there's a time frame for obligating funds, right?
Okay.
So you're talking about long-term.
Yeah. So if we were to endow something technically in a way, and again, I don't have an idea on my mind, to be perfectly honest. I'm just thinking of ways that could perpetuate, if we were to take the interest off of $20 million forever, what would that look like? What could we fund in that way that also might offset some of our, the general fund dollars going forward? And are those
it's hard to answer that question. And some of the other questions have been raised because Esser 3 just got passed and there's almost no guidance out there as to what it means. So we've got a statute people are interpreting. I haven't seen much guidance around this at all. So I think I imagine there'll be guidance coming out, like in the form of FAQs and stuff that might get to your point, or Senator Persick's point about use of funding. But at this point, that's not there, to my knowledge.
Okay. Any timeline on that? When we might come back and have a conversation? When that might come?
I don't know about timelines. It's up to the federal government, obviously. So, Brianna, are you seeing anything for guidance? So far, I haven't.
I do a daily search and I haven't seen anything out on Esser 3 as of yet. I am happy to send along a link. I found a really, really helpful kind of frequently asked questions page
I'd
for
love,
Esser 1, and also an awesome table that kind of provides some guidance for Esser 1 and 2. So I'm happy to send those links along if that would be
So
helpful.
Brianna, that document also goes out to Esser 3 right now. So
Oh, great, great.
great.
Yep.
really recently.
Yep, that would be great if you would be so kind as to send that to our committee assistant, and I'd ask Jeannie if she would email it around to everybody so they have it in their email boxes.
No problem.
We'll post it. Thank you very much. Anything else for Ms. Parker or Mr. Prohl? That was a great update on where things stand. Okay. Thank you both very much.
Thank you, guys.
You're welcome.
Thanks. Good to see you, Mark. Very good to see you.
Nice to be back.
Good to have you
I
back.
introduced myself, but yes.
Very good to have you back. Great, thank you. Okay, committee, we have really one more item of business for the day, and that is committee or gubernatorial appointments. And we have had a number of appointments that we need to have conversations with people about, as well as have some of them into committee. And Jeannie has compiled a list. And so we will have Secretary French, of course, in to have a conversation with the Secretary about, for new senators in particular, I don't know if you've gone through this already with your other committees, just an opportunity to have some questions answered. Let us know, basically why you're interested in continuing. If you are interested in continuing, tell us a little bit about some of your goals going forward. And we will schedule that with Secretary French. What we also have here, though, are people that have been appointed to the State Board of Education and the State Board of Libraries. And so what I am going to do, if everyone is comfortable with this, I will go through and assign senators, individuals to contact based on the region they're coming from. I think the State Board, for example, has a couple people from Rutland County, I've noticed. So this would be Senators Terenzini and Senators Hooker reaching out to these individuals, asking them, why they're interested. We can go through some sample questions before this all happens, but I don't want this to be a rush at the end where we're calling people frantically in May, which sometimes is the case. So I just wanted to give everyone a heads up that some of these assignments will be coming, and I'll work with Jeannie and Carolyn Wesley in Becca's office to provide everybody with some questions that they might ask. Senator Lyons, you've done this many times, as have I. Do you want to add anything to this conversation?
No, I think you've hit the nail on the head. I think it's really important to have some specific questions up front before you talk with folks. And I mean, the other thing is, if there are questions that the committee as a whole has for example, State Board of Education, there may be some issue that is key. That one should, probably come from you, Senator Campion. Make sure that those questions are included so that we know to ask them.
Great. Good point.
It's pretty pro forma.
Yeah. And the one point of clarification I need that I'll get from I think Senator Pershlik will remember this, whether or not members from the state board usually come in for a conversation, or if they are usually just receive the phone call. And that is one that I do not know, being relatively new to the world of ed policy, or back in the world of ed policy. Okay, any other questions? I think we're wrapping up. Jeannie, if you wouldn't mind taking us offline.